this new one because it's got a lot of terms you're going to need to know. So find that sheet I gave you today, get that right in front of you, and we'll tell you a little bit about George Armstrong Custer. Okay, George Armstrong Custer was actually born in December of 1839 in New Rumley, Ohio, which is on your sheet, that New Rumley. So George Custer was born in December of 1839 in New Rumley, Ohio. Now, when he was young, his family moved from Ohio to Monroe, Michigan. And his family really wasn't any type of people of importance. They weren't important politically, they weren't important socially. They were very sound family and very respectable character. So they were a good family, but they weren't socially or politically important. They were a pretty normal family, but were a very good family and very respectable character within their family. So George Custer and his family moved to Monroe, Michigan, where he goes to elementary school and high school. And after he graduates from high school, he enrolls at the Military Academy at West Point. That's kind of a big honor now. If you're going to go to the Military Academy at West Point, today what do you need? You need to know somebody, senators that will give you a recommendation. It's not easy to get into the Military Academy. Because basically what they're doing is they're giving you a full ride scholarship for college in exchange for what?
Service.
Service. So you have to apply. So at that time it wasn't as big a deal, but after high school, Custer enrolled at the Military Academy. Okay? And he graduated from West Point, which is a big honor, in June of 1861. So he goes for 4 years to the Military Academy and graduates from West Point in 1861. Now, from what you've heard of Custer, how would you think his career at West Point went? How'd he do?
Good.
Yeah, he ranked last in his class. And he was issued the most demerits of anyone in his class, and also in the history of West Point. So Custer graduated last in his class. Somebody has to be last, I guess. But you wouldn't expect him to be. And he also accumulated more demerits in his time at West Point than any man in American history. Okay, so he was not the model student. He was punished throughout his career at West Point. Now, when you graduate from West Point, what do you wait for? Military assignment. Where are they going to send you? Well, he was even detained from his first military assignment because he had witnessed a fight at the academy, and instead of breaking it up, he encouraged the combatants to continue their actions. And so he got put up on charges at West Point for bad conduct again, and it detained his military assignment. Stalled it. Okay? Now, Custer was kind of a lucky son of a gun, because actually this detainment was a great break for him. Because instead of going to the military assignment that was scheduled for him, he was detained and ended up being placed under the command of General George McClellan during the Civil War. He's on your sheet. So just to kind of reiterate that, Custer gets in trouble, his assignment is detained, actually becomes a great lucky break for him because his detainment results in him being assigned to General George McClellan during the Civil War. And McClellan was a very respected Northern general during the war. So Custer benefited from that assignment big time. Custer, who was kind of a doof, so to speak, at West Point with all the troubles he had, saw great success under the leadership of McClellan. And Custer earned a reputation as a fearless aggressor during his time under McClellan. He did very well. He had the right teacher, so to speak. So it was a great fit. Now Custer did so well under McClellan that in 1863, at the age of 23, he was promoted to brigadier general. One of the youngest men ever to reach that rank. So he had such success under McClellan during the Civil War that at the age of 23, in 1863, he was promoted to Brigadier General. You ever heard of the Battle of Gettysburg? Custer was a major emphasis in that battle. He led the Michigan cavalry in a headlong charge into the Confederate forces, led the way. You know how most military commanders give the orders and then the soldiers go in there in the back? Custer led every charge in the Civil War. He was at the front of every charge. And he earned great respect at the battle, at the Battle of Gettysburg, because he led the Michigan cavalry in a headlong charge against Confederate forces that really helped turn the tide of that battle. He was right in the front. As a result of that, he was promoted again at the age of 26 to Major General. So, since he was a very successful Civil War commander, what do you think he received during his early life in the military? Well, besides that, a lot of notoriety and a lot of popularity. So he became a very, quote, famous military leader as a result of his early military career under McClellan and what his actions showed in the Civil War. So he came out of the Civil War as a very, very famous leader. Matter of fact, when General Robert E. Lee surrendered to General Grant at Appomattox Courthouse in Virginia, Custer was present and witnessed the surrender, which is not for everybody to get a chance to do. So again, Custer actually was at Appomattox Courthouse in Virginia when Robert E. Lee, the Southern commander, surrendered to General Grant, the Northern commander. He was there during that time. Not everybody got invited to that. Well, what do you think expanded with his success? His ego. He really kind of saw himself as kind of a Superman. Was unable to be hurt in a lot of ways. Had tremendous ego. Okay? There was only one person that could keep his ego under control. Who do you think that was?
His wife.
His wife, Elizabeth Bacon. Better known in life as Libby. Elizabeth Bacon is who he married. She was better known as Libby Custer. Elizabeth Bacon. And he courted her after the Civil War. Now, in the old days, if Stephen Fabella wanted to date somebody, well, how would he go about it in those days? Now what do? You don't even talk to the parents, you just ask them out and go on a date, I guess, I don't know. But what did you do in the old days if you wanted to court or date someone's daughter?
You found those their parents?
Well, you had to get permission specifically from the father to do so, and if you didn't, it was you know, reason for a beating or a shooting. So, I mean, that's the way you did it. You courted them. Okay? And you had to get permission to court. Okay? Once you got permission to court, then you could go ahead and court the girl. Well, after getting permission and courting Elizabeth, he got really drunk one night, and he went to her bedroom window and tossed rocks up at her window trying to get her attention and made a pretty big fool out of himself. Okay? And this is a guy that's pretty famous, and Libby just chastised him like you wouldn't believe for his inappropriate behavior, and just about put him on waivers, so to speak. So he promised at that point that he would never drink again, and he didn't until the day he died. So that was unusual at this time in history. So after Libby chastised him for making a fool of himself while courting her, for getting drunk and throwing rocks at the window, he took a vow never to drink again and lived up to that vow and never again drank. Now Custer and his wife might have had the perfect relationship. He just, as corny as it might sound, he just adored his wife. He did anything he could during his military career to be with her, no matter the cost. Now you got to remember that military guys were gone. They were away from their wives for lots of time, lots of time in their period. But he would do anything to be with her. He really adored her. He was absolutely in love with his wife. And he, again, would do anything to be with her during his military career no matter the cost, which we'll talk about. Now, also something that was very, very important to Custer was his family. He was a big-time family man. He had a brother, Tom. We talked about him yesterday, poor bugger. He also had a brother by the name of Boston. Okay, very close to his brother Tom and his brother Boston. He also had a brother-in-law, James Calhoun, who's on your sheet, who he was quite close with. James Calhoun, and he had a nephew by the name of Audie Reed that he really liked a lot. And they went everywhere with Custer if they could. Tom was in the military. James Calhoun, his brother-in-law, was in the military. Boston was a civilian, and so was Audie Reed. But the ironic thing about that, all four perished with Custer at the Battle of the Little Bighorn. All four were present, all four lost their lives. So, he was quite a family man. Well, after the war, Custer's rank got dropped to captain. From major general to captain after the Civil War. Anybody want to know why? He didn't do anything really wrong. He didn't do anything wrong. Why did he drop his rank?
Because he died.
No, this is right after the Civil War. Why did he drop his rank? Why do you think they do that? They dropped lots of officers' ranks after the Civil War. Why?
New one.
Huh?
New one?
No, not so much.
Better.
No. What they did is they made the mistake of promoting too fast and too often during the Civil War because of great deeds that were being done to promote good morale. So when the Army finished the Civil War, the Northern Army, what did they have? Too many what?
Generals.
Have you ever heard the expression, too many chiefs and not enough warriors? Okay? Somebody's going to say, well, gee, what's going on here? Well, we've got too many chiefs, not enough warriors. We've got too many people making decisions and not enough people on the ground working. Well, that's the trouble. We had too many leaders in the Army and not enough infantrymen. So a lot of people were demoted. And Custer was demoted as well from Major General to Captain. Okay? He didn't like that too much, but I think in a lot of ways he understood that. Well, the Civil War's over, and in July of 1866, Congress passed a new law called the Army Act of 1866. This was after the Civil War. Okay? Anybody want to guess what the Army Act of 1866 actually established? Think about it. The Army Act of 1866. We're making a transition, right? Yeah.
That, no, the soldiers would be held accountable for their crimes, or whatever.
No, good guess. What the Army Act of 1866 did is it transformed us from a military fighting war army to a frontier army. So the Army Act of 1866 formed what was called the Frontier Army. And what was the most famous regiment in the Frontier Army that Custer commanded?
The 7th Cavalry.
The 7th Cavalry. Very good. So, the Army Act of 1866 was passed in 1866, formed the Frontier Army, including the famous 7th Cavalry. Okay? Say, Mr. Media, he's a pretty sharp bunch here.
I'm very impressed.
Now, Custer was assigned to the 7th Cavalry. So in November of 1866, he took his wife Libby and they went to Fort Riley. Anybody know where that's at? Fort Riley.
North Dakota?
Somebody look that up and bring that in tomorrow. Fort Riley. Why did he go there? Because that's where the 7th Cavalry was stationed. Okay? So he went to Fort Riley. Now, when he got there, the 7th Cavalry was in pretty poor condition. Pretty poor. Quality was poor. Give me 3 reasons why. Why was the cavalry in poor shape? Where's it at? Favela, where's that?
What?
Where's Fort Riley?
Kansas?
That a boy.
Okay.
Okay,
Google.
it's in Kansas. That's what the computers are for. Why would the Army, why would the cavalry, why is the 7th Cavalry in bad shape in 1866?
Because
Give me 3 reasons why.
There's not
What?
a war going on, so they're not really...
Close. You're close with that. There's not a war going on. So how about these Confederate soldiers that got their butt handed to them in the Civil War, so to speak, and had to surrender? What have they got to do? They got nothing to do. So your cavalry's full of Confederate soldiers with really no place to go after the war. Okay, and who are they fighting for? In their mind, kind of the North, right? They're fighting with the North after this fought against them. What would be another reason why the cavalry is in poor shape? You know who else came over and fought in the Civil War besides the North and the South? Who else came over? Who came over and helped? French. Foreign soldiers came over. Well, you think they just got on the boats and went back home?
No.
You had a lot of foreign soldiers that had nowhere to go. So what did they do? Joined the cavalry. What did the Confederate soldiers do? Didn't have anything to do after the Civil War. What did they do? Joined the cavalry. Okay? And you also had disgruntled officers that were mad about what? What would these officers be mad about?
Being demoted.
Being demoted. So this is the mixture you had in the cavalry. You had foreign soldiers had nowhere else to go. You had Confederate soldiers with nowhere else to go. You had officers still in the military that were mad because they got demoted. So what type of an outfit is Custer inheriting here, the 7th Cavalry? Not a very good one. Okay, not a very good one. Well, so the cavalry, the 7th Cavalry, was in need of fixing. And Custer was just the man to fix it. Okay? Custer had a reputation of working his men very hard, to the point that in one night, when he took over at Fort Riley, 15 men deserted one night because they were tired of his, routine. It'd be kind of like going to football practice with a new football coach, and he works you so hard you decide to quit and you desert. Only you can't quit the Army. You can quit the football team, but you can't quit the Army. What do they call you if you quit the Army without permission? A deserter. Okay? So 15 men take off one night because Custer's working them too hard. So what does Custer do? He sends soldiers to retrieve the deserters, giving orders to shoot the men, which was a standard order during the Civil War. Two things happened in the Civil War if you deserted. They shot you or they did what? Well, yeah, but before that.
Slay you.
They would put you on display and they would brand you in the cheek. What would they brand you with? A C for coward. I'm not making that up. They would shoot you and drag your butt back and put you in prison. Or they would bring you back, shoot you, bring you back without being shot, and standing display in front of the entire regiment and brand a C. Is that ever going to go away?
No.
Everybody's going to know you deserted. That's the type of thing they did in the Civil War. Well, was Custer still in the Civil War mood?
No.
Yes, he was. So he sent them out, told them to shoot them, which they did. They were brought back, and Custer even refused to let the doctors look at them until they had suffered for a time. Some even died. Needless to say, after this, not many people deserted Custer's command, did they? Set an example. So, that's the type of guy he was. Now, Custer, remember what I told you about him, during this command, in which he was away from Fort Riley, he left his wife there and took, you don't stay there, they're traveling all over. During his command, Custer received a letter from Libby, his wife, saying there was a serious sickness going around at Fort Riley. People were getting sick and dying. So what did Custer do? Because I told you that he would go at great lengths to see her while he was in the military, no matter the cost. What did he do when he got that letter from her? He left his officers in charge and took wagon and headed towards Fort Riley to try to grab some supplies to help those people. Well, what was the problem with that?
You would get sick.
No, he was leaving it off.
He was tried for leaving his post without orders, right? But then what else came up? Think about this, okay? He's trying to reshape the 7th Cavalry. He's got deserters. He's taking that action. All of a sudden he gets a letter from his wife saying that there's big serious sickness problems at Fort Riley. He leaves his command with his other officers, takes a wagon, supplies, and goes back to Fort Riley. So he gets brought up on charges for what? Leaving his post without permission, misuse of government supplies, and what comes back to haunt him? Mistreating of his men. Okay? So when Custer gets back to Fort Riley, after he gets done making sure Libby's okay, he's brought up on charges. 1, leaving his post without permission. 2, misuse of government supplies by taking the wagons and supplies, and 3, abuse of his men. Well, Custer was actually convicted of all 3 in court-martial, and he was suspended from the military without pay for 1 full year. So where do you think he and Libby returned to? Think in your notes, now you gotta be thinkers outside the box. So what, well, I think you got the right thought, you just got the wrong place.
I don't.
Which was what? Well, did you write it down? You'll learn someday you need to do that. Where?
New Rumble.
No, that's where he was born, but you're close. Where did he move to? Where did he and his family move to? Monroe, Michigan. So he and his wife went back to Monroe, Michigan. And you got to remember that Custer's suspended for a year without pay. He's 27 years old and he's in his prime. What would that lead to if you were a person? What? I think you said it. Well, not so much bankruptcy. Well, Libby's folks had some.
Drinking.
Which could lead to, he didn't drink. But what did he get? No, he didn't. You guys are in the abuse stage. What happened to him? He's 27 years old, he's got to go back to his hometown, he can't serve in the military, it's been his whole life for a year. He becomes depressed, very depressed. He becomes very depressed. Because he's in his prime. Well, what's coming up here? What's coming up here pretty quick, going back? What's coming up? What's the military making preparations for?
That one.
The campaign of?
1876.
And who do they need to be part of? So who goes to Custer's defense with the President of the United States?
That one.
Who? Pick one. Who goes to Custer's defense and asks President Grant to reinstate Custer? Who?
Philip Shepard.
You are the man. Philip Sheridan. General Sheridan wrote to President Grant and he asked him to release Custer and reinstate him. So 11 months after his suspension, Custer was reinstated because Philip Sheridan knew that they needed Custer for the upcoming campaign of 1876. Okay, so our next little subtopic then is what? George Armstrong Custer back in command, which we'll save for tomorrow. So what we're going to do now is we're going to see how smart you are for a few minutes. So I'm going to ask you questions, and Mr. McGee's going to pay attention to